The command when it came was a blade of ice in the warm, controlled air of the security nexus. "Fire her! Fire the Black Maid immediately!" Marcus Thorne's voice was a low hiss, devoid of emotion, yet it carried the absolute authority that had propelled him to the pinnacle of the hospitality world. He stood before the wall of monitors, a silent god observing his meticulously crafted universe. His reflection a sharp silhouette in a bespoke Italian suit, against the shifting digital landscapes. His gaze was fixed on a single screen, 17B, which displayed the hushed, carpeted corridor of the East Wing's executive floor. On the screen, a woman pushed a housekeeping cart. To any other observer, she was a fleeting functional part of the hotel's ecosystem, as unremarkable as the tasteful art on the walls or the faint scent of jasmine in the air. She moved with an economy of motion, her posture straight, her expression neutral. She was by design invisible. But Thorne saw more. His fingers tightened on the edge of the console, the knuckles turning white. He leaned closer, his breath fogging a small patch on the screen. The tailored calm he presented to the world fractured, revealing a flicker of something cold and sharp, something akin to staring at a ghost. He knew that face. Not from a staff file or a daily briefing, but from a different world entirely. A world of whispered intelligence, of redacted files and high-stakes games, played in the shadows of global power. Her name, the one he knew her by, was a phantom limb in his memory. Elena Rostova. And she was supposed to be dead. "Sir." The voice of the security chief, a burly man named Harris, crackled through the intercom, laced with confusion. "You mean the new temp, Olivia Thomas? Her shift ends in an hour. Is there a problem with her work?" Thorne's focus snapped back to the present. He straightened his tie, the mask of the unflappable general manager sliding perfectly back into place. "There is no problem with her work, Harris. There is a problem with her presence. Mr. Li Chen's delegation is arriving in 20 minutes. I want the executive floors sterile. No service staff visible, especially that one. Escort her from the property. Tell her it's a staffing miscalculation. Pay her for the full day. Just get her out. Now." "Understood, sir." Thorne did not wait for confirmation. He turned away from the monitors, the image of the woman seared into his mind. This changed everything. The meticulously planned operation, a culmination of months of work for the syndicate, was now compromised by a ghost from a past he had worked diligently to bury. Her presence here now could not be a coincidence. He strode from the dimly lit security room into the gleaming artery of his hotel, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous, and infinitely more interesting. The grand lobby of the Wellington Palace was a symphony of opulent tranquility. A 3-story chandelier, a cascade of 1,000 hand-cut crystals, cast a diamond dust light across the polished marble floors. The air hummed with a quiet energy, the scent of fresh lilies mingling with the expensive leather of the lobby furniture. At precisely 2 o'clock, a fleet of black silent sedans swept into the circular driveway. Li Chen, senior diplomat and special envoy of the People's Republic of China, emerged not with a politician's flourish, but with the subtle gravity of a man who carried the weight of secrets. He was in his late 50s, his face a canvas of disciplined lines, his eyes dark and impenetrable. He was flanked by his security chief, a man whose stillness was more menacing than any overt threat, and a small entourage of aides who moved with the fluid precision of a single organism. Marcus Thorne was already there, his welcoming smile a masterpiece of corporate hospitality. "Mr. Li, an honor to welcome you to the Wellington Palace," he said, extending a hand. Li Chen's handshake was firm, brief, and cool. "Mr. Thorne, your establishment is as impressive as its reputation suggests." His English was perfect, accented only by a precise academic cadence. The formal dance of diplomacy began as Thorne guided them toward the private elevators. He pointed out the architectural details, spoke of the hotel's commitment to unparalleled service. His voice a smooth, reassuring melody, but beneath the surface his senses were on high alert. The appearance of Elena Rostova had turned this high-stakes meeting into a tightrope walk over a canyon. He needed to secure Li Chen to ensure the planned failure of this negotiation without the ghost in his machine disrupting the delicate sabotage he had set in motion. The executive boardroom was on the penthouse floor, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling metropolis. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama, a god's-eye view of the world Thorn sought to dominate. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine set with chilled water, discreet listening devices, and encrypted notepads. As everyone took their seats, Thorn's personal assistant, a young woman with ruthlessly efficient movements, offered refreshments. Seated to Thorn's right was the hotel's official interpreter, Arthur Pence, a portly man in his 60s with beads of sweat already forming on his brow. He looked pale, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. "Shall we begin?" Thorn said, his voice resonating with confidence. Li Chen nodded. "My government is eager to hear your proposal regarding the Joint Cultural and Economic Initiative. We believe it holds significant potential provided the terms are mutually beneficial." Arthur leaned toward the microphone to translate, but as he opened his mouth, a strange gurgling sound escaped his throat. His eyes widened in panic. He clutched his chest, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Before anyone could react, he slumped forward, his head hitting the mahogany table with a sickening thud. Chaos erupted. Li Chen's security chief was instantly on his feet, his hand inside his jacket shielding his principal. Thorn's own security, disguised as hotel staff, moved with practiced speed surrounding the fallen interpreter. Medic Thorn's voice cut through the alarm. "It appears Mr. Pence has suffered a sudden medical emergency. Please, everyone, remain calm." The efficiency with which Arthur was removed from the room was almost as alarming as his collapse. It was too clean, too fast. Li Chen watched the entire performance without a change in his expression, but his eyes, dark and analytical, missed nothing. He noted the way Thorn's security moved, the way Thorn himself seemed more annoyed than surprised. When the room was quiet once more, Thorn clasped his hands together, his face a mask of professional regret. "A most unfortunate and unforeseen event. My sincerest apologies. I hope Mr. Pence will be all right." He paused, letting the drama settle. "However, the Wellington Palace is always prepared for any contingency." He gestured toward a sleek metallic panel on the wall. "We recently installed a state-of-the-art AI translation system, a proprietary technology designed for high-level diplomatic and corporate negotiations. It offers real-time flawless translation with a 99.9% accuracy rate. In some ways, it is even superior to a human interpreter, as it has no potential for personal bias." He smiled, a predator's smile masked by a host's charm. "If you are amenable, Mr. Li, we can proceed without delay." Li Chen conferred quietly with his chief aide. His expression remained unreadable, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. "Very well, Mr. Thorn. Let us see what this marvel of technology can do." Thorn tapped a command into the tablet before him. A soft, synthesized female voice, calm and neutral, filled the room. "System activated. Ready for translation." The trap was set. Elena Rostova, now officially Olivia Thomas, wiped down the already immaculate marble countertop in the service pantry of the penthouse floor. Harris, the security chief, had delivered the news of her dismissal with an apologetic shrug. A simple scheduling error, he'd said. She would be paid for the day. He had been polite, but firm in escorting her to the staff locker room. She hadn't argued. Disappearing was a skill she had perfected. But as she was about to change, a sudden gut-wrenching instinct made her pause. This wasn't a scheduling error. The timing just before the arrival of a major foreign delegation was too precise. Thorn's order was a direct reaction to her presence. He knew. Somehow he knew. Instead of leaving, she had slipped into a service duct, a grimy, forgotten space behind the walls of luxury, and made her way back to the penthouse level. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and fear. She had to know why. Now crouched in the small pantry, she listened. The hotel's audio system, designed to pipe ambient music, was also hardwired with the audio feed from the executive boardroom. A feature for security, she presumed. A feature she was now exploiting. She heard the initial pleasantries, the sudden collapse of the translator, and Thorn's slick introduction of the AI system. Her training screamed at her. There are no coincidences in this world. A human translator is a variable, a potential witness. An AI system is a tool, controllable and without a conscience. Li Chen began to speak again, his voice calm and measured. "Our primary interest is in ensuring that the cultural exchange component of this initiative is handled with the utmost sensitivity and respect for our heritage." The AI's voice responded instantly, the neutral tone making the words all the more jarring. Translation. "Our main demand is that you acknowledge the superiority of our cultural history before any financial discussion. A stunned silence descended upon the boardroom. Li Chen's aides exchanged sharp, disbelieving glances. Thorne held up a hand. "My apologies. A momentary glitch. The system is still calibrating to the nuances of the room's acoustics. Please continue." One of Li Chen's associates, a sharp-eyed woman, spoke next, her tone carefully neutral. "We have prepared a list of potential historical sites for the exchange program. We hope you will find them suitable." The AI replied, translation. "We have a list of non-negotiable locations. Your approval is a formality." This time, the reaction was more pronounced. Li Chen's security chief shifted his weight, his posture becoming perceptibly more aggressive. Li Chen himself simply raised an eyebrow, his gaze fixed on Thorne. In the pantry, Elena felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This wasn't a glitch. This was sabotage of the highest order. The mistranslations were too specific, too perfectly engineered to insult and provoke. This wasn't about a deal failing. It was about creating a diplomatic incident. The meeting continued, each exchange a step further into a minefield. "Li Chen, we believe a long-term partnership must be built on a foundation of trust." AI translation. "We expect your long-term submission to be based on our authority." Li Chen, perhaps we should discuss the security protocols for the artifacts. AI translation. "Let us move on to the terms of your surrender of these assets." Elena listened, her analytical mind working furiously, stripping away the insulting language and examining the structure of the errors. The AI wasn't just inverting meaning. It was selecting words from a very specific lexical set. Words of conflict, of dominance, of subjugation. It was a psychological attack designed to paint Li Chen as an arrogant aggressor and force his delegation to walk away in anger. But why? Who would benefit from torpedoing a peaceful initiative? The answer came to her with the chilling certainty of a forgotten nightmare. The Syndicate. This bore all the hallmarks of their destabilization tactics. Then came the phrase that made her blood run cold. Li Chen, his patience clearly wearing thin, made a final attempt at diplomacy. He spoke of a previous successful summit in Turkey. "The success of the Istanbul Accord 17 years ago proves that our nations can work together." The AI voice delivered the translation, and for Elena, the world narrowed to a single point of terror. Translation: "The failure at Istanbul proves that your nation cannot be trusted." But it wasn't the mangled meaning that made her freeze. It was the word the AI chose to replace 17. It didn't. In the midst of the chaos, it left that one number untouched, but framed it with the word failure. Failure at Istanbul, 17. It wasn't a number, it was a designation. Mission 17, her mission, the one that had ended in betrayal fire and the death of her entire team. She stood frozen, a cleaning cloth clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. This wasn't a random act of sabotage. It was a message aimed directly at her. Someone in that room, someone controlling that AI knew she was alive, and they were using the ghosts of her past to tell her they were here. The invisible woman, the quiet maid, was no longer a spectator. She was a target. And the gilded cage of the Wellington Palace had just become her battlefield. Istanbul, rain. The word from the machine, failure, was a key unlocking a room in her mind she had sealed shut 5 years ago. The sterile scent of hotel cleaning fluid vanished, replaced by the smell of wet cobblestones and charcoal smoke from a street vendor's brazier. The quiet hum of the building's ventilation became the percussive drumming of a cold November rain on a tin awning. She was 27 again, not a maid but an analyst, the sharpest mind in Dmitry Volkov's unit, and she was terrified. "Stay close." Lena Dmitri's voice was a low rumble in her ear, a familiar anchor in the chaotic symphony of the Grand Bazaar's closing hour. The courier is getting nervous. He senses the tale. Dmitri was more than her commanding officer. He was the brother she'd never had, the one who'd seen a brilliant but reckless orphan in the foster system and molded her into a world-class intelligence asset. He had a laugh that could shake a room and eyes that saw everything. Now those eyes were narrowed, scanning the labyrinthine alleyways, the flickering gaslights casting long dancing shadows. Their mission was simple: a ghost extraction. Intercept a syndicate courier carrying a list of deep-cover government agents, switch his drive with a decoy, and melt back into the city's ancient embrace. Mission 17. Supposedly low risk. "He's making a move," Dmitri murmured. The target, a thin man in a worn leather jacket, suddenly ducked into a narrow, unlit passage. "Go now." They moved in a fluid unit of 4, closing the net. But the alley was a dead end. The courier was waiting for them, and he was not alone. The glint of automatic weapons appeared from shadowed doorways. An ambush. Contact Dimitri's roar was swallowed by the eruption of gunfire. The alley became a storm of ricocheting bullets and splintering stone. One of their own, a young operative named Kenji, went down in the first volley. It was a setup. The intel wasn't just bad. It was a lie allure to bring them here to this specific killing ground. Dimitri, they knew Elena screamed over the din, returning fire from behind a rusted dumpster. They knew our approach. He glanced at her, and in that split second, she saw a terrible understanding dawn in his eyes. It wasn't just a leak. It was betrayal from within their own agency. Makarov, he breathed the name of their section chief, a man they trusted with their lives. The name was a death sentence. The firefight was brutally short. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered. Dimitri shoved her toward an iron sewer grating half-hidden beneath a pile of refuse. The access tunnels lead to the waterfront. Go, he commanded. No, not without you. He grabbed her, his grip like steel, his face inches from hers. The sounds of the battle faded into a dull roar. All she could see were his eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. They came for me, Lena. Makarov was always jealous. You were just a bonus. You have to live. You have to be the ghost they can never catch. Promise me. He didn't wait for an answer. He kicked the heavy grating open, shoved her into the darkness below, and turned back toward the fight, roaring a challenge to draw their fire. His last act was creating a diversion for her escape. Through the iron bars, she saw him raise his weapon one last time before a storm of bullets threw him back against the ancient stone wall. Then silence, only the rain, and the suffocating darkness of her escape. Elena's eyes snapped open. She was back in the service pantry of the Wellington Palace, her hand pressed flat against the cool marble of the counter, the knuckles white. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The memory was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her chest that never melted. The AI's message hadn't just been a threat. It was a violation. It had taken the sacred, bloody ground of her past and used it as a weapon. The terror was a cold, familiar serpent coiling in her gut, whispering for her to run, to disappear again, to honor Dimitri's final wish. But as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by something else. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself in 5 long years. Rage. It was a cold, clean fire that burned away the fear. They had taken her life, her name, her future. They had taken Dimitri. They would not be allowed to haunt her in this quiet life she had clawed back from the abyss. Dimitri had told her to be a ghost, but even ghosts could hunt. The practiced emptiness of Olivia Thomas the maid receded. The sharp, analytical mind of Elena Rostova took control. She straightened up her movements once again, precise and economical, but now they were imbued with a dangerous purpose. The first rule of counterintelligence when faced with an unknown threat: assume nothing and gather everything. Thorn was the nexus. His reaction to her presence, the collapse of the translator, the weaponized AI, it all radiated from him. She needed to know his role in this. Was he a pawn, a king, or something else entirely? She pushed her cart out of the pantry, resuming her duties. She was invisible again, but now it was a weapon, not a shield. Her eyes, once downcast and unobtrusive, became scanners, absorbing every detail. She saw Thorn's security team now not as hotel guards, but as operatives. Their suits were a fraction too loose, designed to conceal hardware. Their earpieces were a different model from the standard hotel frequency, smaller, more discreet, likely on an encrypted channel. As she polished a brass railing near the elevators, she saw one of them, a man with a jagged scar on his neck, subtly shift his weight. For a split second his jacket parted, revealing the butt of a Sig Sauer pistol in a shoulder holster. Not standard issue for hotel security. They were a tactical team controlling the floor's choke points. She needed more than observation. She needed proof. Data. Her target was the security nexus she had seen Thorn emerge from. It was the hotel's central nervous system, and it held the answers she needed. Getting in was a fool's errand. The Chief Harris was a former cop with a bulldog's tenacity, and the room was protected by biometric locks tied to the hotel's mainframe. But the Elena who had survived Istanbul was not the same person who had entered that alley. She had spent 5 years being a ghost, and ghosts learn the secret ways of any structure they inhabit. She knew the Wellington Palace not as a guest or even a manager, but from the inside out. She knew its rhythms, its vulnerabilities. She knew that every day at 3:00 p.m., The hotel's primary network servers ran a full diagnostic cycle. During that cycle, for precisely 90 seconds, the live security feed monitoring the Nexus itself would lag, broadcasting a looped recording of the empty corridor from the previous minute. It was a failsafe to prevent the system from monitoring its own maintenance, a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect system. She also knew that Harris, a creature of habit, took his one and only coffee break at 2:55 p.m., always leaving the junior officer a young man more interested in his phone than the monitors in charge. She had a window. It was a sliver, but it was enough. The plan formed in her mind with cold, swift clarity. She needed a diversion to occupy the junior officer and a way past the locks. Both were within her reach, hidden in the mundane tools of her trade. At 2:58 p.m., she was in a service corridor 2 floors below the Nexus. She took a small, powerful magnet she used for retrieving dropped jewelry from drains and wedged it into the guide rail of a service elevator, jamming the door mechanism. An immediate high-priority maintenance alert flashed across the junior officer's screen, an issue requiring his direct attention to override. As the clock on her burner phone ticked over to 3:00 p.m., she was moving. The 90-second window had begun. She strode down the executive corridor, her housekeeping uniform granting her unquestioned access. She reached the unmarked door of the security Nexus. The keycard reader glowed red. From her pocket she pulled her own staff card, but it was the small transparent film she pressed over it that was the true key. It was a thermal print lifter crafted from a mixture of gelatin from the kitchen and residue from a high-gloss floor polish. Earlier in the day, she had accidentally brushed against Harris, her hand steadying his arm, lifting a perfect thermal ghost of his palm print. She pressed the film against the biometric scanner. The light flickered green. She swiped the card. A soft click echoed in the silent hall. The door opened. She slipped inside. The room was cold, the air humming with the power of 100 servers. She ignored the wall of monitors displaying the hotel's lifeblood. Her target was the communications server rack tucked away in the corner. She pulled a small device from the hidden lining of her apron. To anyone else, it was a simple phone charger. To her, it was a high-speed data skimmer, a piece of tech she had built herself from scavenged parts, a relic from a life she was supposed to have left behind. She plugged it into the server's main I/O port. A tiny blue light blinked. It was working, siphoning the encrypted logs from the last-hour internal communication system overrides executive-level commands. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. 30 seconds. 40. The progress bar on the skimmer's tiny screen crept toward completion. 60 seconds. The skimmer blinked green. Copy complete. She pocketed the device, slipped back into the corridor, and closed the door just as the 90-second window expired. No alarms. No alerts. She was a ghost. She found refuge in a deserted linen closet, the scent of bleach and cotton a strange comfort. She connected the skimmer to her burner phone. The decryption software she had written 5 years ago, designed to be untraceable, spun to life. The files materialized on the small screen. Encrypted text scrolled past a language she knew better than any other. And then she saw it. Command log 2:05 p.m. Origin M. Thorne Executive Terminal. Target Kitchen Service Order 4A. Directive Additive 7B Fast-Acting Non-Lethal Paralytic to Water Service for A. Pence. Acknowledge. Her breath hitched. It was proof. He had poisoned the translator. She kept scrolling. System Override 2:15 p.m. Origin M. Thorne Executive Terminal. Target AI Translation Module 3. Directive Purge Standard Diplomatic Lexicon. Upload Custom Lexicon. Syndicate Hostile 01. Activate. It was all there. The premeditated attack. The custom-built linguistic weapon. The cold, hard evidence of his treachery. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a corrupt manager playing a dangerous game. He was the director, the puppet master pulling every string. The ghost in the halls clutched the phone, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the fire of purpose now burning within her. The hunt was no longer theoretical. She had her target. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this day would not end with Li Chen's capture. It would end with Thorne's destruction. In the sterile silence of the linen closet surrounded by towering stacks of Egyptian cotton sheets, Elena Rostova waged a war. The data on her burner phone was a tangible thing, a declaration that the life she had painstakingly built from the ashes of her past was an illusion. The quiet anonymity of Olivia Thomas was a fragile shell, and the enemy was already inside. One part of her, the wounded, exhausted survivor, screamed at her to act, erase the data, walk out of the service exit, catch the first bus out of the city, and never look back. She had paid her dues in blood and grief. This was not her fight. Dimitri's last command had been for her to live, and this dance with shadows and ghosts was the antithesis of life. It was a siren song luring her back to the grave she had already escaped. But as the wave of panic subsided, another voice rose to meet it, a voice that sounded remarkably like Dimitri's. It was the voice of the mentor who had taught her that living was more than just the act of breathing. It was about principle. It was about standing for something even when you were the only one left standing. What kind of life would it be, knowing she had possessed the truth and allowed the same kind of treachery that killed him to consume another? To stand by while a man, whatever his role was, led into a slaughterhouse by a traitor smiling in his face. The internal battle was brief, but absolute. She would not run, not this time. Running had bought her 5 years of quiet desperation. Acting might buy her a clean conscience or a quick death. At this moment, they seemed equally preferable to the alternative. Her mind, now fully engaged, began to move with the speed and precision of a supercomputer. Direct contact with Li Chen was impossible. Thorne's operatives were watching his entire delegation. An anonymous call was amateurish and easily traced. She needed a method of communication that was deniable, untraceable, and, most importantly, credible. It had to be a whisper that could cut through the noise of Thorne's elaborate deception. Her mind scrolled through a mental blueprint of the Wellington Palace's complex infrastructure. Not the guest-facing map, but the hidden network of systems that were the hotel's true circulatory system. And there it was, the guest experience interface. A seemingly innocuous system managed by the concierge desk used to program personalized welcome messages and dinner recommendations onto the televisions in the guest suites. It was a closed-loop network, a digital cul-de-sac. Thorne's team, focused on high-level threats like external hacking and encrypted radio signals, would consider it beneath their notice. It was the perfect delivery system. Next, the message. Words were subjective, easily dismissed as a prank or a glitch. She needed something absolute, a piece of data that could not be misinterpreted by its intended recipient. A key that would unlock a shared secret history. Numbers. 41,126 28,744. The coordinates etched themselves behind her eyes. They were not just a location on a map. They were the precise coordinates of the alley in Istanbul where Mission 17 had died, where Dimitri had fallen. To an outsider, it was a random string of digits. To a professional in the world she once inhabited, it was a ghost signature. It was a warning of betrayal of the highest order, and it was her credential proving the warning came from someone who knew the bloody cost of such treason. The plan was set, now for the execution. She slipped out of the linen closet, her movements silent and fluid. She was a shadow in the hotel's brightly lit arteries. She avoided the main staff elevators instead, taking a winding path through service corridors and stairwells, a route that existed on no official floor plan. Her destination was a small, forgotten janitorial terminal in a sub-basement, tucked away behind a row of humming water heaters. The room was thick with the smell of dust and ozone. The terminal was an ancient piece of hardware, but its Ethernet cable was a direct line into the hotel's foundational network. She powered it on the screen, flickering to life with a basic text-based command line interface. This was a language she understood. Bypassing the glossy, user-friendly concierge software, she began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was no longer a maid. She was a surgeon cutting directly into the hotel's digital nervous system. She located the network address for the suite assigned to Li Chen's security chief. A man of his position, she reasoned, would be the primary filter for any incoming threat intelligence. A direct message to Li Chen might be intercepted or dismissed. A message to his protector would be analyzed. She crafted the command carefully. She wouldn't send it as a welcome message. She would inject it as a system-level diagnostic alert, an error code that would command attention and bypass the usual decorative interface. Target Suite 2712. Display Mode Override. Text String System Diagnostic. Calibration Error 41.0136 N28.9744. Please stand by. She stared at the line of code for a single heart-stopping moment. This was the point of no return. She hit enter. The command vanished into the network. With methodical precision, she wiped the terminal's command log, leaving no trace of her digital intrusion, and melted back into the labyrinth of the hotel's underbelly. In Suite 2712, a spacious corner room with a panoramic view of the city, Captain Wei stood with his back to the window, his arms crossed. He was a man in his 40s with a face that seemed carved from granite, and a disciplined stillness that was the result of a lifetime spent in the shadows. He was listening to the boardroom audio feed through a secure earpiece, his expression a mask of contempt. These American theatrics were an insult. The technical failures, the clumsy provocations, it was unsophisticated and obvious. His only question was what the true objective was. The large 80-inch television screen on the wall, which had been displaying a serene looping video of a bamboo forest, suddenly flickered. The image vanished, replaced by a stark black screen with white block letters. System diagnostic, calibration error, 41.0136 and 28.9744, please stand by. Wei's first reaction was a surge of irritation. Another technical failure in this monument to incompetence. He reached for the in-room phone to demand an explanation from the front desk, but his hand paused mid-air. His training honed in the unforgiving world of state security screamed at him. Systems do not fail this way. Diagnostic errors are codes, not geographic coordinates. It was illogical, and anything illogical in his line of work was a potential signal. He turned his back to the room's internal security camera, a precaution so ingrained it was instinct. He removed a small, heavily encrypted satellite device from his briefcase. It was a closed system completely firewalled from the hotel's compromised network. His fingers moved swiftly, inputting the string of numbers. He hit search. The device processed for a moment, then displayed the result. The text was in Mandarin. Location Istanbul, Turkey. Fatih District. Proximity alert site of agency. Name redacted. Mission 17. Codename Ghost Requiem. Outcome total asset loss. Suspected internal compromise. The air in the lavish suite seemed to grow cold. Wei stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. This was not a glitch. This was a warning. A sophisticated, targeted message from a professional. A friendly ghost reaching out from the wreckage of a past operation to warn them of a present danger. The sender wasn't just telling them there was a traitor. They were proving their bona fides with a piece of intelligence that was likely classified at the highest levels. He knew what he had to do. He deleted the search query, pocketed his device, and walked out of the suite. He moved with a new urgency, his face still an unreadable mask, but his mind now a razor-sharp weapon. He arrived at the boardroom doors just as Thorne's AI was mistranslating a comment from Li Chen about mutual economic benefits into a crude statement about your nation's inevitable financial dependency. Thorne was offering a placating apology for the continued software bugs. Wei caught Li Chen's eye. The diplomat, who had been maintaining an aura of weary patience, met his gaze. Wei made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his right hand, a subtle brushing of his thumb against his index finger twice. It was an old, obscure signal from their early training days, a sign they hadn't used in 20 years. It meant, the room is compromised. We are in a trap. Play for time. The change in Li Chen was invisible to anyone else in the room, but to Wei it was a seismic shift. The diplomat's shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. The tension around his eyes softened, replaced by a look of weary, almost academic curiosity. The mask of the offended guest fell away, replaced by the far more dangerous mask of the master strategist. He was no longer a victim of a diplomatic farce. He was a player in a deadly game, and he had just been handed an unseen ace. Mr. Thorne, Li Chen said, his voice smooth as silk, interrupting the AI's next translation. These technological difficulties are, of course, frustrating, but perhaps they present an opportunity. He smiled a thin, enigmatic smile that did not reach his eyes. They allow us to move past the prepared statements and speak more directly. Tell me, what is it you truly wish to achieve today? Marcus Thorne, basking in the success of his perfectly executed sabotage, leaned back in his chair, confident and smug. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his carefully controlled puppets had just seen the strings and were now preparing to seize them for themselves. Marcus Thorne was an artist, and the executive boardroom was his canvas. He savored the quiet, controlled chaos he had unleashed. Each mistranslated phrase from the AI was a perfectly applied brushstroke of discord. He watched the subtle tightening of jaws among Li Chen's aides, the flicker of confusion and anger in their eyes. His plan was unfolding with the elegant precision of a symphony. This was not merely a job. It was a performance, a masterful display of psychological warfare that would be recounted with admiration in the syndicate's inner circles. This mission was his magnum opus, the final bloody audition for a seat at their table. He could already taste the victory, the power that would come with it. He had spent years transforming himself from a disgraced government operative into the immaculate, untouchable general manager of the Wellington Palace. It was the perfect cover, a kingdom of glass and steel, where he was the absolute monarch. And today, he would use his kingdom to deliver a prize that would make him a legend. Then he saw it. It began with Captain Wei's brief departure and return. The man walked back into the room, and his energy was different. He was no longer a passive guard. He was a coiled spring. Thorne, a connoisseur of human behavior, saw the infinitesimal signal. Wei passed to Li Chen a glance, a shift in posture, nothing a civilian would ever notice, but to Thorne, it was as loud as a gunshot. And Li Chen's response was immediate. The mask of the offended diplomat dissolved not into anger but into a chilling analytical calm. The weary frustration vanished, replaced by the deep, patient focus of a predator that has just caught the scent of its true enemy. They knew. The prey knew they were in a trap. Thorne's mind reeled. How his system was perfect, a closed loop of deception. No external communication could have penetrated the room's sophisticated countermeasures. The leak had to have come from inside the hotel. His thoughts instantly snagged on the ghost. Elena Rostova. The woman he had ordered removed. The timing was too precise to be anything else. A cold fury, methodical and sharp, began to smolder beneath his calm exterior. He had underestimated her. A critical error. His own past had taught him the price of such errors. He remembered the sterile gray office of his former agency director, the man's face a mask of disappointment. "Your methods are too extreme," Marcus, the director, had said, sliding a termination letter across the desk. "You captured the target, yes, but you left a trail of bodies and broken protocols. The ends do not always justify the means." Thorne had learned a different lesson that day. The director was a fool, a bureaucrat afraid of the necessary darkness required to win. The syndicate, however, had understood. The shadowy figure who had approached him in a dimly lit bar weeks later had not spoken of restraint or morality. He had spoken of results, of clarity of purpose. "We don't see a liability." Mr. Thorne, the man, had said, his voice a dry rustle of old money and new power. "We see a talent being wasted." They had given him the Wellington Palace as his personal fiefdom, a place to hone that talent. And he would not allow a ghost from his old world to jeopardize his ascension in the new one. "An excellent point," Mr. Lee, Thorne said, smoothly rising from his chair. "It seems our technological enthusiasm has gotten the better of us. Allow me a moment to consult with my technical chief. Perhaps a system reboot is in order." He assigned his nervous-looking deputy to keep the delegation engaged and strode out of the boardroom, his face a mask of professional concern. The moment the door closed, the mask dropped. He was no longer a hotelier. He was an operator. He bypassed the elevator, taking a private stairwell directly to the security nexus. He swept into the room, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the junior officer. "There's a critical system feedback loop originating from the West Wing spa. I need you to run a Level 1 diagnostic on their local network. On site." "Now," Thorne commanded. The young man, eager to prove himself, practically ran from the room. Thorne slid into the command chair. The Nexus was his true office, the bank of monitors, an extension of his will. He dismissed the immediate chaos of the live feeds, his fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up system logs. He was not looking for a person. He was looking for a ghost's footprint, an anomaly in the hotel's digital heartbeat. He started with the time frame just after he'd ordered Elena's removal. Nothing. Then he cross-referenced it with the time he'd seen the shift in Li Chen's demeanor. His eyes narrowed. There. 2:58 p.m. Maintenance alert. Service elevator 4C, 25th floor. Mechanism jam. A trivial, everyday occurrence. He almost dismissed it, but he followed the thread. Who reported it? Anonymous system flag. He kept digging. 3:12 p.m. Security Nexus door seal broken. 3:01:48 p.m. Security Nexus door seal re-engaged. A 96-second window. The main access log, the one the junior officer would check, was clean. Wiped. An expert's work. But the door's physical sensor operated on a separate primitive circuit, a relic of an older system. It didn't record who entered, only that the seal had been broken. It was a faint whisper of a breach, but to Thorne it screamed her name. His fury was now mixed with a grudging respect. She was good, but she had been out of the game for too long. She didn't know about the new system redundancies he himself had installed. He pulled up the hotel's internal network traffic logs, filtering for the exact time of the breach. And there it was almost invisible amidst the terabytes of routine data. A single tiny outbound data packet originating from the dusty, forgotten janitorial terminal in the sub-basement. Destination, the guest experience interface. Target Suite 2712. Captain Wei's room. Thorne leaned back in his chair and a low, dangerous laugh escaped his lips. The sheer audacity of it was beautiful. The ghost was not just hiding in his house. She was rewriting the furniture arrangements while he was in the room. He felt a thrill he hadn't felt since his days in the field. This was no longer a simple capture mission. It was a hunt. A duel between two masters of the same dark art. "The drill is now live." He spoke into his encrypted radio, his voice calm and lethal. His tactical team scattered throughout the hotel acknowledged instantly. "Initiate soft lockdown of all service corridors West Wing. Our target is a female non-uniformed moving with purpose. Consider her highly skilled. I want her contained." He began to play the hotel like a massive multi-level instrument. He watched the camera feeds, but he knew he wouldn't see her. She knew the blind spots better than the men who installed the cameras. So he switched tactics. He brought up the Wi-Fi network overlay. Most devices were static guests in their rooms, staff at their posts. But there was one signal, a weak, unregistered MAC address that was moving. Her burner phone. The signal was faint, bouncing between network repeaters in the service corridors. But it gave him her general vector. She was moving down toward the sublevels. "She's heading for the ground-level exits," his team leader reported through the radio. "No." Thorne countered, a predatory smile touching his lips. "She's not. She knows the exits will be watched. She's smarter than that." He looked at the hotel schematics, his mind racing ahead of her. Where would she go? A place with multiple escape routes, cover, and sensory disruption. The sub-level 1 laundry facility. He began to conduct his symphony. With a few keystrokes, he shut down the service elevator in the west wing she was moving toward. Her signal paused, then rerouted. He had forced her toward the main central stairwell. He then triggered a silent alarm in that stairwell, one that wouldn't alert her but would show up on his team's tactical displays. They began to close the net. He watched her Wi-Fi signal descend. Sub-level 1. It moved along the main corridor, and then vanished into the massive signal-disrupting expanse of the laundry. The industrial noise of the washers and dryers, the steam, the endless rows of machinery, it was the perfect urban jungle. But it was a jungle with only 3 exits. Thorne's fingers danced across his console. Lock SL1A, lock SL1B, lock SL1C, deactivate freight elevator SL1. The schematic on his screen glowed as the exits turned from green to red. She was boxed in. He switched the display to the thermal imaging overlay. The room was awash of heat from the massive machines. But behind a row of industrial dryers, he saw it. A single cooler blue silhouette, the heat signature of a human body, moving with cautious, deliberate steps. He had her. He stood up, the thrill of the hunt coursing through him. This was a pleasure no amount of money could buy. He keyed his private channel to the man with the scar, his tactical commander. "The ghost is in the laundry. Sub-level 1. Seal the perimeter. No one enters or leaves. I'm going down to handle this personally." He walked out of the security nexus, leaving the blinking lights and silent data streams behind. The artist was done painting. It was time to sign his work. The industrial laundry facility was a cavern of steam and rhythmic thunder. The percussive churn of a dozen massive dryers, the hiss of hot water pipes, the metallic clang of sorting bins. It was a symphony of chaos that had always felt like a shield to Elena. In the noise she could think, in the anonymity of the hotel's steaming guts, she was safe. Here she began to sift through the data on her phone, her mind already mapping out Thorne's network, looking for a vulnerability, a crack in his armor. She plotted a course. The sub-basement network junction would give her access to the hotel's external communication lines. From there, she could send a single encrypted burst of data to a dormant contact address she had memorized years ago. It was a long shot, but it was a plan. She moved toward the service stairwell at the far end of the room, her steps quick and sure-footed on the slick concrete floor. She reached for the heavy steel door's push bar. It didn't budge. A faint red light glowed above the handle. The magnetic lock was engaged. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. She turned her eyes, scanning the vast room. She moved swiftly to the next exit, a loading bay door that led to the underground parking garage. The same telltale red light greeted her. Locked. She raced to the freight elevator, the one large enough to carry linen carts by the dozen. The call button was dark. The power had been cut. The rhythmic churning of the dryers no longer felt like a shield. It felt like the grinding gears of a closing trap. This wasn't a general lockdown. It was surgical. The cage had been built specifically for her. Then a new sound sliced through the industrial din. It was quiet, out of place, and utterly terrifying. Click, clack, click, clack. The slow, deliberate cadence of expensive, hard-soled shoes on concrete. The sound was methodical, unhurried. The sound of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Elena's heart leaped into her throat. She extinguished her phone's screen and melted into the shadows behind a colossal canvas bin overflowing with stained white tablecloths. She held her breath, her own frantic heartbeat seeming to echo the thumping of the nearest machine. A silhouette appeared at the end of the long aisle, a tall, sharp figure made hazy by the swirling steam. He was alone. It was Thorn. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply began to speak, his voice a calm conversational tenor that was somehow more menacing than any threat. It carried over the noise with unnatural clarity. The acoustics in here are dreadful. All this vulgar noise. He gestured vaguely at a churning machine. But I do find the heat rather cleansing. It has a way of boiling things down to their essence. Don't you agree, Elena Rostova? Her name. Her real name, spoken aloud in this dank concrete tomb after 5 years of silence. It hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She remained perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow, her mind screaming. He knows. He knows. He knows. Thorn began to walk slowly down the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't searching for her. He was addressing her, confident that she could hear his every word. I must confess, I'm an admirer of your work. Mission 17 in particular, a masterpiece of operational failure. So much chaos, so much potential, all squandered in a filthy alley in Istanbul. He paused, his head cocked as if listening to a memory. Dmitry Volkov, a true believer, a man of principle. They're always the first to die, aren't they? He truly thought he was serving a cause. He never understood that the cause is always secondary to the players. Elena's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the canvas bin. He was desecrating the memory, peeling back the scar tissue to expose the raw, weeping wound beneath. Dmitry was a fool. Thorn continued, his voice laced with a cold academic pity. He was loyal to a system that was already rotting from the inside. Your section chief Makarov, on the other hand, he was a pragmatist. He understood that loyalty should be an investment, not a suicide pact. The syndicate rewards pragmatism, Elena. We reward those who see the world for what it is, a chessboard, not a crusade. He had stopped now, only a few feet from her hiding place, his back partially turned to her. He was looking at his own faint reflection in the glass of a dryer door. I know you're there, he said quietly. I can see your phone's EM signature bleeding heat on my tactical display. A faint blue glow in a sea of red. You're cold, Elena, but you're not invisible. Not anymore. He turned to face her hiding spot, his eyes seeming to pierce the shadows and lock directly onto hers. Let's dispense with the theatrics. Li Chen is not a diplomat. He is a high-level asset from his country's Ministry of State Security. He has spent the last decade accumulating data, our data. Names, accounts, operations. He grew a conscience, or perhaps just a better offer, and now he is attempting to defect. The syndicate, his former employers, has been contracted by his own government to retrieve their property. This is not a political matter. It is a simple business transaction. And you, my dear ghost, are an unforeseen operational expense. He took a step closer. Which is why I am here to offer you a deal. A logical choice. I want Li Chen. You want to remain a ghost. Our interests can align. All you need to do is help me. Create a diversion. Disable his security chief's communications at a key moment. Give me a 30-second window. In return, the hunt is called off, not just mine. The syndicate will issue a stand-down order on your file. We will give you a new identity, a real one, layered and clean. A passport, a Swiss bank account, with a generous seed fund, a quiet life in a country with no extradition treaty. The very life Dmitri died to give you. All you have to do is be the pragmatist he never could be. The offer hung in the steamy air, shimmering and seductive. A real life. An end to being Olivia Thomas the maid. An end to the constant grinding fear of being discovered. An end to the struggle. It was everything she had dreamed of in her darkest, loneliest moments. Wasn't this the ultimate way to honor Dmitri's sacrifice to finally truly be safe? The alternative. Thorne continued, and the conversational warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by the flat, hard tone of an executioner, is significantly less appealing. My men will enter this room, and they will kill you. Slowly. But that's the pleasant part. Before your heart stops, I will personally upload your complete unredacted file to a public server and send the link to every major intelligence service in the world, the Russians, the Israelis, the Iranians, your own former agency. I will send it to every criminal network from the Yakuza to the cartels. I will extinguish your ghost status with the force of a supernova. There will be no corner of the earth left for you to hide in. Your name will be a death warrant. That is my promise. This was the moment. The pivot point on which the rest of her life, however long that might be, would turn. The temptation was a physical ache, a yearning for peace so profound it almost buckled her knees. She could see it, a small cottage by a lake. A new name, the absence of fear. Safety. But then, in her mind's eye, she saw Thorne's face. The cool, appraising eyes. The smile that never reached them. And his face began to merge with another Makarov's, the man who had sold them out in Istanbul. The man who had laughed as he condemned them to die. They were the same. Two sides of the same debased coin. Men who viewed courage, loyalty, and love as weaknesses to be exploited. Men who believed in nothing but the acquisition of power. To accept Thorne's deal would be to agree with his philosophy. It would be to concede that Dmitri's sacrifice was a fool's errand. It would mean that Makarov and the soulless pragmatic world he represented had truly won. The peace she would gain would be a poisoned peace bought with the currency of her own soul. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from behind the bin. The maid's stoop was gone. Her shoulders were back, her chin was level. She was no longer hiding. Her face was pale in the harsh fluorescent light, but her eyes burned with a cold, resurgent fire. A genuine, triumphant smile spread across Thorne's face. He believed he had won the argument, that she had seen the cold, hard logic of his offer. "Have you made the logical choice, Elena?" he asked, his voice smooth as venom. She met his gaze, and the 5 years of fear and grief and hiding coalesced into a single unshakable point of defiance. "My name," she said, her voice quiet, steady, and clear. In the cacophony of the laundry is Olivia Thomas. I am a housekeeper at this hotel. She took a single step forward out of the shadows and into the light. And you are going to regret ever learning my real one. Thorne's triumphant smile curdled into a mask of cold fury. Her defiance was not merely a complication. It was an insult to the fundamental logic of his world, a world where sentiment was a fatal flaw and survival was the only metric of success. A sentimental choice. He snarled the words, cutting through the industrial roar. "And your last." He raised his hand to his earpiece, his thumb pressing the transmit button. "Team Alpha breach and capture. Non-lethal if possible. I want her to have a moment to contemplate her mistake before we conclude this." The heavy, magnetically locked doors at either end of the long aisle began to slide open with a pneumatic hiss. Dark figures in tactical gear armed with carbines began to flood into the room, their movements fluid and predatory. They moved in a classic pincer formation designed to cut off all escape. Elena had seconds. Her mind, a finely tuned engine of tactical analysis, processed the environment, not as a laundry, but as an arsenal of improvised weapons. Her eyes darted from one machine to another, cataloging possibilities. To her left, a row of massive industrial presses used for tablecloths, their hydraulic lines pulsing with immense pressure. To her right, A tall metal shelf containing canisters of industrial-grade cleaning chemicals, a large drum of ammonia-based solvent next to a vat of high-concentrate chlorine bleach. Separately, they were cleaners. Together, they were a chemical weapon. She moved, not with panic, but with a terrifying explosive purpose. She lunged toward the wall, grabbing a loose section of copper piping, and with a surge of adrenaline wrenched it from its fitting. A jet of scalding high-pressure steam erupted from the wall with a furious roar. She directed the plume like a flamethrower toward the advancing operatives on her left. The dense white cloud instantly blinded them, their shouts of surprise turning into cries of pain as the superheated vapor hit their exposed skin. Under the cover of the steam, she sprinted toward the chemical shelf. She didn't bother with finesse. She slammed her shoulder into the metal upright, sending the entire structure crashing to the floor. The heavy drums ruptured their contents, mixing on the slick concrete. A thick yellow-green cloud of noxious chloramine gas began to billow upwards, the acrid smell burning the air. The operatives on the right choked their disciplined advance, dissolving into a frantic retreat as the corrosive gas filled their lungs. For her final act of chaotic genius, Elena leaped onto the control panel of the nearest industrial press. She bypassed the safety guards and slammed her hand down on the emergency release valve. With a deafening shriek of protesting metal and a thunderous hiss of hydraulics, the multi-ton steel plate of the press slammed down onto its base. The impact was titanic, shaking the very foundations of the room and triggering the facility's fire suppression system. Overhead alarms blared to life, a cacophony of sirens and strobing red lights. High-pressure sprinklers erupted, drenching the room in a cold, disorienting downpour. It was the symphony of chaos she needed. While Thorne's men were blinded by steam, choked by gas, and deafened by alarms, Elena slipped through the pandemonium. She moved toward the back of a row of dryers to a small, unassuming maintenance hatch that was covered in dust and grime. It wasn't on the main schematics Thorne was monitoring. It was part of the original building plans leading to an old service duct that had been mostly sealed off during renovations. It was a ghost's exit. She wrenched the hatch open and disappeared into the darkness within the sounds of the chaos she had created fading behind her. The service ducts were a tight, claustrophobic network of metal and wires, the air thick with the smell of dust and age. She moved with the practiced silence she had honed over 5 years of living in the margins. Through the metal grates of the vents, she could hear the filtered sounds of the hunt. Radio chatter, angry and confused. Thorne's voice a blade of cold fury, demanding a report, demanding her location. They had lost her. For now, she navigated the labyrinthine passages by memory and instinct, climbing ladders, squeezing through narrow gaps until she reached the vertical shaft that ran up the spine of the penthouse level. The presidential suite was a fortress, but she had been its cleaner, its invisible caretaker. She knew its secrets. In a small, forgotten linen closet on the penthouse floor, she found what she was looking for, a section of wall covered by a tapestry. Behind it, a plaster panel covered the sealed-off shaft of a Prohibition-era dumbwaiter, a relic from the hotel's first incarnation. She used the metal handle of a broom to punch through the plaster, revealing the dark, narrow shaft. It was a direct, forgotten path into the heart of the fortress. She emerged into the silent, opulent service pantry of the presidential suite. The air smelled of polished wood and imported coffee. She took a single, steadying breath. The moment her foot touched the cool marble floor of the pantry, a figure moved with impossible speed from the shadows. She found herself staring down the barrel of a pistol held in a hand as steady as stone. Captain Wei stood before her, his eyes cold and hard, his posture a perfect embodiment of lethal force. He had not been idle. While the farce played out in the boardroom, he had pulled back, transforming the suite into a hardened defensive position. "Do not move," Wei said in low, threatening Mandarin, the silencer on his weapon giving the command a sibilant hiss. Elena slowly raised her hands, palms open and forward. Her heart was pounding from the exertion, her clothes damp and grimy, but her voice was calm, her Mandarin flawless. "Captain Wei," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The coordinates I sent were the introduction." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. "This is the countersign Makarov sends his regards." The name struck Wei with the force of an electric shock. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Makarov, the legendary traitor. A name whispered like a curse in the deepest, most secret corridors of global intelligence. This woman, this grimy, exhausted woman who had appeared from a hole in the wall, knew a name that could get them both killed. Her message was no longer just a warning. It was a shibboleth, a password spoken between initiates of a deadly secret world. His weapon did not lower, but his stance shifted slightly. Before he could respond, Li Chen appeared in the doorway of the pantry, flanked by 2 more guards. The diplomat's face was a calm, unreadable mask, but his eyes were alive with a formidable intelligence. He had heard everything. Elena did not wait for permission to speak. She addressed Li Chen directly, her voice, a low, urgent cascade of information. "My name is Elena Rostova. I am a former field analyst for the same agency that was betrayed by Makarov. Your host, Marcus Thorne, is an asset for the Syndicate, the same organization Makarov sold his soul to. This meeting is a meticulously staged trap designed to capture you. The hotel is a cage. Thorne's tactical team has replaced the hotel staff, and they control every exit. You have no way out." She took a breath. "But I do." Li Chen studied her. He took in her appearance, the maid's uniform, the grime on her face, the exhaustion in her posture. But he looked deeper past the surface and saw the steel in her eyes, the sharp, analytical mind working behind them. He had spent his life reading people, and he knew he was not looking at a maid. He was looking at a professional, a survivor. He was weighing the immense risk of trusting this ghost against the absolute certainty of the trap he was in. After a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, he made his decision. He gave a curt nod to Wei, who finally reluctantly lowered his weapon. "What is your plan?" Ms. Rostova. Li Chen asked, his use of her real name a quiet, formal acknowledgement of their new reality. The alliance was forged in that instant, a desperate pact between a hunted spy and a hunted defector. The entire dynamic of the situation had irrevocably shifted. Elena was no longer running. She was now on the offensive. She walked past them into the main drawing room of the suite, a space of breathtaking luxury that was now their prison and their command center. She went directly to Captain Wei's tablet, which displayed a detailed schematic of the hotel. "Thorne has locked down the conventional routes," she said, her finger tracing lines on the screen. "He is hunting me, thinking I am the only variable. He believes he is the master of this building, that he controls the board." She looked up from the screen, her eyes meeting Li Chen's. A cold, dangerous light had returned to them, a fire he recognized from the most formidable opponents he had ever faced. "He is wrong," Elena stated, her voice resonating with absolute certainty. "He thinks he owns the house." She tapped the screen, indicating the network of service ducts, forgotten shafts, and maintenance lines that were the building's true secrets. "I'm about to prove to him that the people who spend their days cleaning the filth always know the house better than its master." The white-hot furnace of Marcus Thorne's humiliation radiated through the damp, chemical-laced air of the laundry. His immaculate suit was spattered with grimy sprinkler water, his hair was disheveled, and the lingering stench of chloramine gas was a testament to his utter failure to control the situation. She had not just escaped his perfect trap, she had detonated it in his face using the very tools of his kingdom, its machinery, its chemicals, its infrastructure as weapons against him. She had made him look like an amateur. His fists clenched the knuckles, straining against his skin. The cold, calculated artist was gone, replaced by the predator whose prey had just gored him with its horns. The soft game of psychological warfare was over. There would be no more subtleties, no more illusions. He keyed his encrypted radio, his voice a low, lethal snarl that betrayed none of the chaos surrounding him. "All teams, this is Thorne. The soft phase is terminated. Target Rostova is active hostile and has likely made contact with the principal. We are transitioning to hard containment. Operation Steel Cage is a go. I repeat, Steel Cage is a go." The acknowledgement was a series of clipped professional clicks in his ear. Across the Wellington Palace, a sleeping giant of steel and automation awoke with violent force. In the grand lobby, a financier was loudly complaining to the concierge about the temperature of his champagne when the world ended. A deafening klaxon, a sound of industrial emergency never before heard within these opulent walls, began to shriek. Before anyone could react, the grand floor-to-ceiling windows and the massive glass entrance were obliterated by descending slabs of metal. Concealed steel shutters, each weighing several tons, slammed down with the thunderous finality of a guillotine, plunging the sunlit lobby into an eerie artificial twilight, illuminated only by the frantic strobing of emergency lights. The crystal chandelier, moments before a symbol of elegance, now cast 1,000 panicked dancing shadows. In the Michelin-starred kitchen on the 3rd floor, a world-renowned chef dropped a truffle-slicing mandolin with a clatter. His team froze their culinary ballet, interrupted by the blaring alarm. The kitchen doors burst open, but it wasn't panicked waitstaff who entered. It was 6 men in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by the sinister visors of gas masks, their weapons held at a low-ready position. Everyone on the floor, now one of them, commanded, his voice distorted and metallic through the mask's speaker. The terrified kitchen staff were herded at gunpoint into a walk-in freezer, the heavy door thudding shut behind them, sealing them in cold and darkness. On the guest floors, the lockdown was a wave of controlled terror. Panicked guests in silk robes and business suits spilled into the hallways, their voices a rising tide of fear and confusion. Then Thorne's voice, stripped of all its welcoming warmth, boomed from the PA system, an omnipresent godlike entity. Attention valued guests and staff. A critical systems malfunction involving a volatile chemical agent has been detected in the hotel's ventilation system. For your absolute safety, the building is now under a full security lockdown. Please remain calm. A specialist response team is on site and in control of the situation. His specialist response team was already moving with brutal efficiency. They swept through the hotel from the ground up, a black tide of tactical precision. They didn't knock. They used master key cards, bursting into rooms and herding the occupants out. For your safety, we are moving everyone to a centralized, secure location. They repeated, their voices devoid of emotion. They were not rescuers. They were human sheepdogs clearing the field. The grand ballroom on the second floor, a place of weddings and galas, was transformed into a makeshift holding pen. Its gilded doors locked from the outside. The goal was simple and ruthless: to sanitize the battlefield. By funneling all civilians to the lower floors, Thorne was turning the upper half of his hotel into a sterile kill zone, a vertical labyrinth where his hunters could move without fear of witnesses or collateral damage. High above the unfolding chaos in the silent, insulated bubble of the presidential suite, Elena, Li, Chen, and Wei watched the fortress being built around them. Elena had bypassed the suite's entertainment system, patching Wei's secure tablet directly into the hotel's security camera network. They had a god's eye view of their own entombment. They saw the steel shutters slam shut, sealing them off from the outside world. They watched the black-clad operatives sweeping the floors, their movements coordinated and precise. They saw the terrified guests being forced into the ballroom. "He's not just trapping us," Elena said, her voice low and tense as she analyzed the tactical display. "He's clearing the board. He is funneling all civilians to the lower floors to give his team a clear field of fire from the 10th floor up. He's preparing for an assault." Li Chen stood beside her, his face grim. The pretense of the diplomat was long gone. He was now what he had always been beneath the surface: a strategist, a spy facing his final unwinnable battle. He is thorough. He conceded, a note of professional respect in his tone. To seize control of a building this size this quickly, the syndicate's resources are formidable. Captain Wei was doing a sweep of the suite, checking every window, every door, every potential point of entry. The windows are ballistic glass, but they won't hold up against sustained fire or explosives. The main door is reinforced, but his team will have breaching charges. We are in a gilded cage waiting for the hunters to arrive. They all knew their time for planning was rapidly running out. Elena's mind worked furiously, her fingers flying across the tablet's screen, cross-referencing live camera feeds with the hotel's architectural blueprints she had committed to memory. Ducts, elevator shafts, maintenance crawl spaces. She was mapping a path of ghosts through a machine of steel. Then the refined speakers in the suite's ceiling, which moments before had been playing a soft, classical arrangement, crackled to life. It wasn't the general PA system. Thorne had accessed the suite's private channel. He was speaking directly to them. His voice was a cold, menacing purr, the sound of a cat that has cornered a songbird. "A special message for our distinguished guests in the presidential suite," Thorne began. "It appears our little system's malfunction is more serious than we anticipated. Our sensors indicate the source of the chemical leak is highly concentrated on the upper floors." He let the veiled threat hang in the air for a moment. "For this reason, our specialist hazardous materials team will be conducting a full floor-by-floor sweep to neutralize the threat. For maximum efficiency, they will begin at the top and work their way down." Another pause, this one filled with predatory silence. "Their estimated time of arrival at your door is 60 minutes. I do hope you'll be prepared to cooperate fully with their instructions. Enjoy the rest of your stay." The speaker clicked off, plunging the suite back into a tense silence, broken only by the faint, distant echo of the hotel's main alarm. The message was brutally, elegantly clear. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a threat. It was a clock, a 1-hour countdown to their execution. On the security feed, Elena zoomed in on the stairwell of the floor just below them. A squad of 8 heavily armed operatives laden with breaching tools and heavy weapons was taking up position. The game of cat and mouse was over. The siege had begun. Leechin turned from the screen, his gaze locking with Elena's. The calm facade was gone, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. 1 hour, Ms. Rostova, he said, his voice flat. Thorn has turned this hotel into a fortress. Can you get us out of a fortress in 60 minutes? Elena looked from the grim faces of the men in the room to the complex web of lines on the tablet screen, the schematics of her former workplace, her former prison, and now her only hope. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, but her eyes were alight with a defiant, dangerous fire. A fortress is only as strong as its weakest wall, she said, her voice quiet but ringing with the certainty of a master craftsman. And I know exactly where all the cracks are. 59 minutes. Captain Wei announced, his voice a flat, hard stone in the opulent silence of the suite. He was looking at the security feed where the tactical team on the floor below was beginning to assemble breaching equipment. Elena didn't look up from the tablet. That's 58 minutes more than we need to be here. She swiped a finger across the screen, zooming in on the schematic of the service pantry. The dumbwaiter. It's our door. It's a century-old relic, Wei countered, moving to her side. The shaft is likely unstable. The cables could be rotted through. It is an unnecessary risk. The shaft was reinforced in 1998, with a steel support cage to run fiber optic cables to the penthouse, Elena replied without missing a beat. I saw the original work orders in the maintenance archive when I was looking for a solution to a persistent draft in the First Lady's bathroom. It's ugly, but it's solid. It's the one place they won't be looking because it doesn't exist on their modern security plans. It's our way into the hotel's bloodstream. Leichin gave a single decisive nod. We trust your expertise, Ms. Rostova. Lead the way. The next 5 minutes were a blur of focused, disciplined action. They tore down the suite's heavy silk draperies, their priceless fabric repurposed into improvised harnesses and safety lines. Wei and his remaining guard, a young stoic man named Bao, pried open the sealed dumbwaiter door with a fireplace poker, revealing a dark square shaft that smelled of dust and decay. The descent was a terrifying, claustrophobic journey into the past. They moved one by one down the main cable, the rough, greasy steel biting into their gloved hands. The darkness was absolute, the only sounds their own ragged breathing and the faint, ghostly groan of the cable settling under their weight. They were ghosts, slipping between the bones of the building. They emerged into the gleaming, cavernous expanse of the hotel's main kitchen. The sudden shift from the dark, narrow shaft to the vast, brightly lit world of stainless steel and marble was disorienting. The air was cold and smelled of bleach, the silence unnatural. The kitchen was a sterile, abandoned battlefield. Cameras in every corner, Wei whispered, his weapon already up, scanning the room. And motion sensors on the main doors. They won't be looking for motion inside the room yet, Elena said, pointing to a large monitor on the wall. A digital schedule displayed the kitchen's automated functions. Thorn's team is methodical. They will clear this floor in approximately 12 minutes. We need to be gone before then. But we're not leaving without creating a diversion. Her eyes landed on the automated sanitation system controls. In 2 minutes, she said, a dangerous glint in her eye. This entire kitchen is scheduled for a high-pressure, high-temperature, deep clean. We're going to make sure it happens ahead of schedule. While Wei and Bao stood guard, Elena and Li Chen, the distinguished diplomat, now a saboteur, worked with frantic speed. They used knives from a butcher's block to jam the pressure release valves on the main water lines and reroute the flow. They disabled the system's water temperature regulators, allowing it to heat to a full scalding boil. Their final touch was to wedge a heavy steel canister of cooking oil directly in front of a primary drain, ensuring the boiling water would have nowhere to go but up and out. They finished with seconds to spare. From a small remote service panel near the exit, Elena watched a security feed of the kitchen entrance. A 4-man fire team moving in perfect tactical formation breached the door. Now she whispered and slammed her hand on the sanitation cycle's activation button. The kitchen became a vision of industrial hell. From 100 nozzles in the ceiling and walls, jets of boiling water erupted with the force of fire hoses blasting across the steel surfaces. The jammed valves caused the pressure to spike, turning the jets into chaotic, unpredictable weapons. The floor instantly flooded, the hot oil spreading across the surface of the water, creating a treacherous, scalding slick. Thorne's men, caught completely by surprise, slipped and fell, their shouts of pain and alarm lost in the roar of the water and the hiss of steam that filled the room like a volcanic cloud. In the security nexus, Thorne watched the thermal camera feed of the kitchen turn from a cool blue to a chaotic blooming red. He slammed his fist on the console. "She's using the building as a weapon," he roared. "She's in the service corridors. All teams on the third floor converge, box her in." But Elena was already gone. They had slipped out a side door during the initial chaos and made their way to a laundry chute. The nauseating, tumbling descent spit them out into the familiar rumbling chaos of the sub-level laundry, the site of her earlier confrontation with Thorne. But now this was her territory. "He'll be tracking my phone's Wi-Fi signal," she said, tossing the burner phone into a bin of wet towels destined for the incinerator. "From now on, we move blind." She led them into the labyrinth of heating ducts and maintenance tunnels that webbed the hotel's lower levels. It was a world away from the luxury above a grimy, sweltering maze of pipes, wires, and roaring machinery. They moved through the darkness, guided only by Elena's eidetic memory of the building's hidden anatomy. Their journey was a series of tense, close encounters. Twice they froze in a narrow crawl space, pressing themselves against the wall as the heavy boots of a search party pounded on the metal catwalk just feet above their heads. Radio chatter filtered through the vents. Thorne's voice, a constant, furious presence, directing his teams, trying to predict her next move. But he was playing chess on a board he couldn't see while she knew every square. She was leading them up again towards a critical junction. "Where are we going?" Li Chen asked, his voice steady, despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "The grand ballroom," she replied, or more accurately, the space above it. The crawl space opened up into a vast, dark cavern. They were standing on a narrow network of steel catwalks suspended in a dizzying web of rigging and steel beams. 100 feet below them, through the latticework of the structure, they could see the ornate, coffered ceiling of the grand ballroom. And through the gaps in the acoustic tiling, they could see the ballroom floor itself. It was filled with the terrified, huddled shapes of the hotel guests, their prison and Thorne's human shield. Patrolling the perimeter of the ballroom floor below were a dozen of Thorne's operatives. "He's using the hostages to prevent an external breach." Wei surmised, his voice a low growl. "And his men are positioned to control the entire space." "We need to get to the access hatch on the other side," Elena whispered, pointing across the precarious expanse. "It leads to the old wine cellar. It's a blind spot. No cameras." They began to move their steps painstakingly slow on the narrow catwalk, every slight creak of the metal amplified in the cavernous silence. They were halfway across when Bao, the young guard, put his foot on a section of catwalk weakened by a past water leak. With a sharp crack, the corroded metal gave way. Bao cried out as his leg plunged through the opening, a heavy wrench from his tool belt slipping free and clattering down onto the acoustic panels below. The sound was like a bomb in the silent ballroom. Down below, the patrol froze, every head snapping upwards. "Contact," one of them shouted, pointing. Before Elena could scream a warning, the operative opened fire. A burst from his carbine tore through the fragile ceiling tiles, erupting in a shower of plaster dust and debris just inches from Elena's face. All hell broke loose. The cavern became a kill box. Bullets ripped through the ceiling from below, a chaotic upward storm of lead. The guests on the floor screamed, scrambling for cover under the banquet tables. Above, Wei and Bao returned fire, their pistols sounding like pops against the roar of the automatic weapons. They weren't trying to hit anyone. They were providing suppression, forcing the team below to keep their heads down. "Go, go now," Wei yelled, laying down a volley of shots toward the muzzle flashes below. Elena grabbed Li Chen's arm and pulled him along the catwalk, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the steel beams around them. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the taste of plaster dust. They scrambled toward the hatch, the sounds of the firefight raging behind them. They tumbled through the hatch, slamming it shut, just as a line of bullets stitched across the metal where they had just been. They fell into the cool, musty darkness of the old wine cellar. They had made it. They were through. The silence here was absolute, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, aging wine, and freedom. Through a small ventilation grate near the floor, they could see the concrete floor of the sub-level parking garage. The exit was just yards away. Wei was the first to his feet. He moved toward the heavy oak door that led to the garage, his weapon raised. He put his ear to the wood, listening. Then he froze, motioning them all to silence. From the other side of the door they heard it. The distinct metallic click-clack of weapons being armed. The low murmur of multiple voices. The scrape of boots taking up defensive positions. Elena's blood ran cold. The camera in the cellar was an old defunct model, a blind spot she had counted on. But Thorne, anticipating her destination, hadn't needed to see. He had simply read the map, seen the most logical escape route, and sealed it with his best men. They were trapped. The sounds of the enemy were just beyond the door, a wall of steel and firepower between them and their escape. Freedom was a single door away, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles. The silence in the old wine cellar was as thick and heavy as the dust on the forgotten bottles lining the walls. Outside the heavy oak door, the sounds of Thorne's victory were sharp and clear, the click of rifle safeties being disengaged, the quiet murmur of a team settling into an inescapable siege line, the scrape of a boot on concrete. They were trapped. The last move on the board played the king cornered. A speaker hidden amongst the wine racks crackled to life, Thorne's voice filling the small space, amplified and oozing with smug triumph. "It's over, Elena. A truly spirited defense. You fought with the heart of a zealot. But the game, as they say, is finished. The board is mine." He paused, letting the finality of his words sink in. "Open the door. Surrender the asset. Do it now, and I might even be convinced to honor my original, very generous offer, a quiet life. It's still on the table." For the last time, Captain Wei moved to the door, his body a shield, his face a grim mask of resolve. He would fight to the last man. Li Chen stood beside him, his expression one of profound, weary disappointment, not in his protectors, but in a world where such treachery was a constant. They looked at Elena, their eyes asking the silent question, what now? But the panic they expected to see on her face was not there. In its place was a strange, unsettling calm. A serenity that did not belong in a tomb. "He's right," she said, her voice a quiet counterpoint to the tension in the room. "The game is finished." She looked from Li Chen to Wei, and a small ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He just doesn't realize he was checkmated an hour ago." We stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "We are trapped. He thinks he was hunting me." Elena explained, her voice gaining strength, the voice of a strategist revealing her masterstroke. "He thinks this chase through the hotel was me running for my life." It wasn't. It was a performance, a carefully choreographed delay. She took a deep breath. This entire time, Thorne's focus has been on the physical space of this building. He's been tracking heat signatures, Wi-Fi signals, watching cameras. He was playing checkers. I was playing a different game entirely. She looked toward the ceiling. "When I was in the sub-basement at that old janitorial terminal, I did more than send you a warning, Captain. That terminal is hardwired directly into the hotel's primary fiber optic trunk line. While Thorne was busy chasing my phone's signal, I initiated a high-speed encrypted data upload." Li Chen's eyes widened as he began to understand. "What data?" "Everything," Elena said. "The complete security logs I copied from the Nexus. The full, unedited audio from the boardroom farce. Every command Thorne issued to his teams, every door he locked. And something else." She looked at Li Chen. "While you were rigging the kitchen, you passed me your personal data key. I told you I needed it to bypass a firewall. That was a lie. I was copying the entire contents of your secure drive, the data. The Syndicate is trying to kill you for." A slow, dawning comprehension spread across Wei's face. "You uploaded all of this to whom?" "A digital dead drop," Elena answered. "A heavily encrypted server that erases itself every 24 hours. For the last 5 years it has been monitored by only one person, a man named Director Coulson, my former mentor at the agency. The man who trained both me and Dmitri, and more importantly, the man whose entire career has been dedicated to dismantling the Syndicate after they orchestrated the murder of his own son." She looked at the reinforced oak door, at the unseen enemies just beyond it. The upload took 47 minutes. It finished the moment Thorne initiated the lockdown. "For the last hour, he and his men haven't been hunting us. They've been performing. Every move, every command, every threat has been recorded, geotagged, and analyzed in real time by a team of people who have a vested personal interest in seeing him burn." She walked to the intercom panel on the wall. "It's time to bring the curtain down." She pressed the button. Thorne, her voice was clear and steady. "A change of plans. You were right. It's over. I'll give you Li Chen." A moment of silence on the other end, then Thorne's voice, cautious but dripping with arrogance. "You've finally seen the logic of the situation. I'm pleased. Here are my terms. Elena continued, her voice cold as ice. My life for his. You let me walk out of here clean. In return, I will personally deliver the asset to you. The exchange happens in the grand lobby. 5 minutes. No tricks, no teams. Just you, me, and Li Chen. We will walk out of this cellar and your men will escort us. You have my word. Li Chen and Wei looked at her, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning admiration. It was a classic gambit, a final deception to lure the king out from behind his pawns. You expect me to trust the word of a ghost, Thorn scoffed. You have no choice, Elena replied. Because if you breach that door, my associates now have a standing order to release the complete unedited data packet to every major news organization on the planet. Your face, your voice, the syndicate's name, plastered on every screen from here to Beijing. You'll be famous, but your employers, they don't like famous. The silence on the other end was long and heavy. Thorn was weighing his ego against his survival. He wanted to look her in the eye when he won. He wanted to savor her defeat. The grand lobby. 5 minutes, his voice crackled back. And Elena. I look forward to our conversation. The escort was tense. 2 of Thorn's men, their faces grim, led them from the cellar up a service elevator and through a final corridor. As they stepped into the grand lobby, the scale of Thorn's control was breathtaking. The vast space was empty, eerily lit by the strobing red emergency lights. On the balconies overlooking the lobby, at least 4 snipers were in position, their laser sights painting tiny red dots on the floor. Thorn was waiting for them at the bottom of the grand staircase, a monarch in his captured palace. He was flanked by his 2 elite commanders, including the scarred operative. He held all the cards. The victory was his. A wise decision, Thorn said as they approached, his voice smooth and triumphant. Pragmatism wins in the end. Elena stopped a few feet from him, Li Chen at her side. She looked around the lobby at the snipers at the tactical team. Then she looked at Thorn. You once told me pragmatism is about understanding the board. She began, her voice calm and clear. Your mistake was thinking the hotel was the board. I was playing on a different one entirely. Thorn's smile faltered. For the last 63 minutes, Elena continued, every word you've spoken, every command you've given, has been fed into a direct live feed to a tactical operations center in Langley, Virginia. Director Coulson and his team have been watching your performance with great interest. They particularly enjoyed the part in the laundry room. They're considering it for their training curriculum. Thorn's face, a mask of triumphant arrogance, only moments before began to crumble, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning animalistic rage. You're bluffing, he screamed, his composure shattering completely. Am I? Elena asked. Check your comms, Thorn. Any chatter from the outside world? Any signal getting in or out that you don't control? No, because my people initiated a full-spectrum signal jam around this entire city block 10 minutes ago. You're not in a fortress, you're in a fishbowl. At that exact moment, the world erupted. A series of deafening explosions rocked the hotel to its foundations. The massive steel shutters over the main entrance, designed to withstand a bomb blast, were blown inwards, as if they were made of tin foil. A blinding white light flooded the lobby as a dozen flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously. Through the smoke and swirling debris, figures in black, unmarked tactical gear poured into the lobby from all sides. They moved with a speed and violence that made Thorn's men look like amateurs. Above, the high windows of the lobby shattered as operators rappelled down from the helicopters that now hovered roaring in the night sky, their searchlights pinning the entire scene in brilliant white. It was a swift, overwhelming, and brutally efficient assault. Thorn's snipers were neutralized before they could even fire a shot. His teams, disoriented by the flashbangs, were systematically taken down with cold, practiced precision. In the heart of the chaos, Thorn's mind broke. His intricate plan, his masterpiece, had disintegrated into ruin in a matter of seconds. He saw his future not a seat at the syndicate's table, but a dark cell and a lifetime of debriefings, and he snapped. With a primal roar of fury, he did the only thing a cornered rat could do. He lunged not for Elena, but for Li Chen, a last desperate attempt to seize his prize. But Elena was waiting. She had known this was his final move. She didn't try to block him physically. Instead, as he lunged, she screamed a single word, a code word from his own past. The termination phrase his old agency used to signify that an operative had been compromised and was to be considered a hostile. Chimera, The words spoken in her clear, sharp voice bypassed his rational thought and struck him at a deeper psychological level. It was the word his old director had spoken just before security had dragged him from the building years ago. It was the trigger for his deepest failure. For a single fatal second, he froze his mind, a maelstrom of past trauma and present fury. It was the only opening way needed. The captain moved like a panther, slamming his shoulder into Thorne's side, driving him to the marble floor. Elena was there a heartbeat later, her foot stomping down on Thorne's wrist, sending his hidden pistol skittering across the floor. It was over. The lobby was now filled with smoke, shouting soldiers, and the controlled chaos of a secured scene. A tall, grim-faced man in tactical gear with a director's insignia on his collar strode toward Elena. "Agent Rostova," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Director Coulson sends his regards. He says, 'Welcome back.'" Thorne was being hauled to his feet, screaming threats and curses, his face a mask of impotent rage. A separate medical team was already attending to Li Chen, confirming his identity and preparing him for immediate exfiltration. The diplomat caught Elena's eye one last time and gave her a profound, silent nod. Acknowledgement, respect, gratitude. For a moment, Elena stood alone in the center of the swirling chaos she had orchestrated, the strobe lights flashing across her face. The grime, the sweat, the cheap maid's uniform, it all seemed to fall away. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer running. The ghost had finally come into the light. The aftermath of the battle was a surreal tableau of smoke and silence. The grand lobby, a stage for the final act, was now a scene of controlled, methodical cleanup. The strobing emergency lights had been replaced by the steady clinical glare of portable floodlights set up by the tactical teams. Medics were quietly attending to the shaken but unharmed hotel guests, leading them out in small blanket-draped groups. The sharp scent of cordite still hung in the air, a harsh perfume layered over the hotel's signature jasmine. Elena stood near the shattered main entrance, a still point in the swirling activity. Thorne was being led away in shackles, his face hooded, his final venomous glare at her promising a revenge he would never have the chance to enact. He was just a man now, stripped of his power, his kingdom in ruins around him. A ghost being led to his own grave. Director Coulson arrived an hour later. He wasn't the imposing figure of authority she remembered, but an older, grayer man whose shoulders seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 secrets. He dismissed the commander with a nod and approached Elena alone. They stood for a long moment amidst the debris, two relics of a clandestine world forced into the light. "It's good to see you, Elena," he said, his voice a low, weary gravel. It was not the voice of a director, but of a mentor speaking to a lost student. "You too, sir," she replied, the honorific feeling strange and foreign on her tongue after so long. "The data you sent." He began, shaking his head slightly in disbelief. "It's the single most significant intelligence coup against the Syndicate in a decade. You didn't just save Li Chen. You've given us a roadmap to their entire leadership structure. You've given us Makarov." The name hung between them, a ghost in its own right. "Is he?" "He was neutralized an hour ago at his villa in Lake Como," Coulson said, his eyes hard as flint. "There will be no trial, no escape. The debt for Mission 17 has been paid in full." Elena felt a profound, shuddering release, as if a heavy chain she had been dragging for 5 years had finally been severed. It wasn't joy. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just closure. A quiet, solemn end to a chapter written in blood. Dmitri was avenged. The official debriefing took place days later in a location that had no name, a sterile, soundproofed room that felt like it existed outside of time. It wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation. A quiet reckoning with the past. Coulson sat across from her, a thick redacted file on the table between them. "The world thinks Elena Rostova died in a fire in Istanbul," he said, sliding the file forward. "Her name is on a memorial wall back at Langley. Officially, she is a hero who died in the line of duty. We can keep it that way. Olivia Thomas can be given a new identity, a generous pension. She can have the quiet life you've been living. No one would ever bother you again." He let the offer settle in the quiet room. It was the promise of peace, the fulfillment of the dream that had sustained her through 5 years of lonely, invisible work. A life without ghosts. Or, he continued, leaning forward, his gaze intense, "We can bring Elena Rostova back from the dead." He explained the proposal. It wasn't a request for her to rejoin the ranks to become another cog in the vast bureaucratic machine. It was something new, Something radical. The data you provided has given us a unique opportunity. The syndicate is in disarray. Their command structure is fractured. Now is the time to strike, but we can't use conventional methods. We need an unconventional weapon. We need a ghost. He outlined his plan, a new autonomous off-the-books task force, codename Ghost Unit. It would be small, fast, and lethal, operating in the deepest shadows. Its sole mandate to hunt and dismantle the syndicate's global network piece by agonizing piece. It won't be my unit, Elena Coulson said, his voice resonating with sincerity. It will be yours. You will have complete operational autonomy. You will handpick your team. You will choose your own targets. You will answer to no one but me. You won't be a soldier taking orders anymore. You will be the architect of their destruction. You will operate by your own rules, the ones you learned in the dark. Elena sat in silence, the weight of his offer settling upon her. She thought of her 5 years as Olivia Thomas. She had gone into hiding to escape the world of violence and betrayal, to find a semblance of peace. But what had she truly learned? She had learned to be invisible, yes. But in that invisibility, she had learned to see. She saw the world not from the penthouse suites of power, but from the service corridors and sub-basements. She saw the overlooked, the underestimated. She learned that a building's true weaknesses aren't in its steel doors, but in its forgotten passages. She learned that a person's true strength wasn't in their title or their uniform, but in their resilience, their hidden skills, their unwavering character in the face of oblivion. Her time as a ghost hadn't been a punishment. It hadn't been an escape. It had been her crucible. It had burned away the arrogance of the young, brilliant analyst she had been and forged her into something far more formidable, a leader who understood the world from the bottom up. She realized then that true peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the power to choose your own battles, to fight for a cause you believed in. Hiding had kept her alive, but it had not allowed her to live. Confronting Thorne, saving Li Chen, that had been the first time in 5 years she had truly felt alive. She looked across the table at Coulson, at the man who had seen her potential all those years ago. "Who do I get to pick for my team?" she asked. A slow, weary smile spread across Coulson's face. He knew he had his answer. 3 months later, Elena Rostova stood in a room that was the exact opposite of the Wellington Palace. It was a renovated warehouse in an industrial district, a space of bare concrete, exposed steel beams, and cutting-edge technology. This was the headquarters of the Ghost Unit. Her headquarters. She was no longer wearing a maid's uniform or the agency's anonymous suit. She was dressed in practical tactical gear, her hair cut short, her face free of the weary resignation that had defined her for so long. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and focused. Before her stood her team. There were only 4 of them, the first recruits she had handpicked. They were misfits, geniuses the agency had sidelined. A disgraced forensic accountant who could track money through the darkest corners of the web. A washed-out field operative with an uncanny talent for infiltration. A young, brilliant linguist who could break any code but couldn't handle the agency's rigid social structure. They were all ghosts of a sort, overlooked and underestimated. They were perfect. On the large digital screen behind her, a complex web of names, locations, and financial transactions was displayed. It was the first thread of the syndicate's vast global network. It was their first target. Elena looked at the faces of her new team, her family forged in the shadows. She thought of Dmitri, of his sacrifice. She thought of the quiet dignity of a life spent cleaning up other people's messes. And she understood. She was not just avenging the past. She was building a future where men like Thorne and Makarov could no longer prey on the innocent. She was no longer a housekeeper. She was a cleaner of a different sort. She tapped the screen, highlighting a name at the center of the web. "Our first target," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable authority, "is a banker in Zurich. He thinks he's invisible. We're going to show him that nothing stays in the shadows forever." She was not Elena Rostova, the haunted survivor. She was not Olivia Thomas, the invisible maid. She was something new, something more. She was the ghost who had decided to hunt back, and her work was just beginning. In a world that so often judges us by the uniforms we wear and the titles we hold, it is easy to forget that a person's truest value lies hidden beneath the surface. The story of Olivia Thomas is a powerful reminder that circumstance does not define character. For 5 years she was a maid, a ghost in the halls of power, overlooked and underestimated. Yet that very invisibility became her greatest strength, granting her a unique perspective and a profound understanding of the world's hidden machinery. Her journey teaches us that our greatest strengths are often forged in our moments of deepest struggle. True peace is found not in escaping our past, but in confronting it with courage and purpose. Our worth is not measured by the role we are assigned to play, but by the integrity we reveal when the script is torn away, by the choices we make when no one is watching, and by the quiet heroism of stepping out of the shadows and into the light when it matters most. Thank you for joining us for this story. Narratives like this serve as a vital reminder that heroes are often found in the most unexpected of places, and that a reservoir of great strength can lie dormant within any one of us, simply waiting for its moment to be seen. If this story resonated with you, we would be so grateful if you would show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your encouragement allows us to continue sharing tales that explore the depth and resilience of the human spirit. We thank you for your time and look forward to sharing another story with you soon.